We didn't know, there was a 30% chance that it would happen. There were thunderstorms. There was even a lightning strike near the shuttle, but it went off and it was a perfect day. What was your impression on this last final launch of the Atlantis?
It was an emotional launch.
Yeah.
Every launch is emotional. When you see 7 million pounds of thrust all of a sudden going skyward. But it was emotional because a lot of the people here are affected. Of course, it's emotional for me every time.
Yeah.
I say a little prayer for the crew just before the ignition of the engines. And of course, this was a flawless mission.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Let me get your insight on the tone here. I've observed that a lot of the people, the fans, if you will, the American public, we speak about NASA in present tense and in the future. And when I've watched interviews with a lot of the workers, they look at it as a past tense because they know that many of their friends and their colleagues will lose their jobs. The business area around here in Central Florida, that I-4 corridor, which is so important, worried about those jobs. You went from 12,000 plus 2 years ago to at the end of August, 1,000 workers with the shuttle program. How do you reconcile what's happening here and give these people hope?
Let me put the overall numbers. About a year ago, we were at 15,000 employees here at the Kennedy Space Center. Now, mind you, there's another 10,000 right across the Banana River at the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. But 15,000. We're going to go down to about 8,500. But that, as we build these new rockets that the Deputy Administrator was explaining, we're going to go back up to about 10,500.
When will we build those new rockets?
Well, that's starting right now. As a matter of fact, we have the funding through the rest of this year for the new blueprint, which was the NASA law that we passed last year. But whenever there's anybody dislocated in a job, that's a tragedy.
And we know the unemployment rate has ticked up to 9.2%. And Florida is very important. This I-4 corridor, especially 2004, voted heavily for George W. Bush. 2008 swung President Obama's way. The Democrats could be in trouble. The president could be in trouble as a result of job loss, especially in this central I-4 corridor. What do you tell those people who don't believe that that rocket program will get underway and are worried about these jobs?
Well, first of all, they will see when NASA announces this new big rocket, and that ought to come sometime in the next 10 days while the space shuttle flight is up there, so people can see there's a plan. NASA's already given the contract for the capsule, and one of the rockets that's going to be going to and from the space station, it's going to launch this fall.
Right.
So there's going to be this activity. But, you ask about the president. Basically, what is dragging down potentially the future for the president is the economy overall. If the economy continues to improve, albeit in a place like Florida, it's going to be very slowly. Then I think people will have a different attitude.
But as long as we see that 9.2, that is not a hopeful situation.
Well, what was more significant in the job figures today was only 18,000 new jobs created nationally.
That's far less than the 150,000 that experts wanted.
That was a real downer.
Senator Nelson, thank you so much for your time, your service here as well, and we greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much,
Thanks,
sir.
Tamara.
Well, joining me now, former astronaut and retired Navy Captain Winston Scott. Captain, thank you so much for joining me. Let me talk to you quickly about what you'd like to see next for NASA. We just heard from Senator Nelson, so beautifully put that, there is hope ahead, and also NASA administrators saying the same thing, but what would you like to see next?
Well, certainly being an astronaut as opposed to a politician or a financial person, I'd like to see all of these things happen sooner rather than later. It never goes as fast as us astronauts would like to see it happen. But I agree that the future is bright. I think the commercial companies are going to step up and do their part in providing access for crew and cargo to low Earth orbit. But I'd like to see a strong NASA also. We really need NASA building spaceships, putting people into space, and truly exploring the cutting edge, doing esoteric things that nobody else can do. And then we'll have the commercial sector building on NASA's success and coming along along behind and making spaceflight affordable to private individuals and to companies. So that's kind of what I'd like to see, sooner rather than later.
It's interesting. I want to bring up something quickly. The Apollo astronauts Jim Lovell and Gene Cernan, they had an op-ed not long ago in the USA Today declaring that the space policy under the Obama administration is, quote, in substantial disarray. They were not happy about the cancellation of the Constellation program under the George Bush administration. What are your feelings on the way the administration is handling NASA and the space program?
Well, I am one of those people who are just a little bit concerned about the direction in which we are going. I agree with Jim that I'd like to have seen us keep the shuttles flying, at least some minimal number of flights, and keep Constellation going, retire the shuttles after Constellation was in place. So I agree that we're not going along in as focused, quick a manner as I'd like to have seen us go. But again, I'm trying to be optimistic about it and believing that our desire to be leaders in space exploration will maintain, and that will again pick up where we left off and maintain that lead in space. We're back
here at the Kennedy Space Center, where we watched the shuttle Atlantis blast off into space. And from the first shuttle launch on April 12th, 1981, which was the shuttle Columbia, to today's historic launch, the program has put the United States first in the world for space exploration. The U.S. launched the first woman, an African American, into space, and if it weren't for the shuttles, the International Space Station would not exist. The shuttles also enabled the Hubble telescope to reach further into the universe to send back amazing images for all of us. NBC's veteran space correspondent Jay Barbary is back with me now. And Jay, I'll just start off even with the Hubble telescope. I believe Atlantis had 5 repairs, was involved greatly in getting that telescope to where it needed to be. But people still ask this question a lot. You know, how has NASA or how has the shuttle program improved our lives? How has it improved the United States?
Do you like GPS?
I love it.
Do you like to tweet?
I just did.
Do you like to do all of this?
I just did all of that. Yes,
it does that. Do you know what most people don't realize? Had we not gone to the moon, had there not been a space program, we would be 50 years behind in science as we are today. Because when they decided to go to the moon, Kennedy did for in a decade, they had to invent the transistor. Yeah. It was the vacuum tube. We had to do all this. Did you know that the first spacecraft, Mercury, didn't have a computer?
No, I did not know that.
Did not have. In fact, Gordo Cooper, on the last one, they stretched it out to 22 orbits. He had to dead stick fly it home.
Wow.
And he was so good that he landed as close to the recovery ship as did the other guys with their automatic pilot that was on it. So anyway, also, in your laptop that you're using today,
yes,
you got probably 100 times the computation in that computer as they had on the Apollo spacecraft.
Well, all of these things are true. Then why is it so difficult for NASA to get support? We know, for example, Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords fought so hard, and that's why she was so supported in the state where she didn't live, but her husband worked, fighting for NASA and getting the dollars needed. Why is it so difficult then to get support for the programs as we move ahead?
Well, you know, a lot of people think that we haven't had as much support as we did in the beginning, which was for getting Apollo going. Right. And they did. When you go back to what $1 then equals the dollar today, we've got much more support. But NASA's budget has remained consistent. They say, for example, like, well, they had to cancel the shuttle program because they didn't have the budget. Well, the budget that's already approved by Congress is bigger than it was last year.
Yeah.
We're talking 18 billion going back maybe to 16 billion. They've got the money there. The problem is, what do you spend it on?
The question, as you heard Jay mention, is what is next for NASA and for American manned spaceflight? Joining me live to talk about that, NBC News correspondent Tom Costello. And Tom, we hear people talking about Orion over and over. First of all, explain Orion, and is it a part of the scrap Constellation program?
Yeah, well, it is. The Orion is the space capsule that will carry people into space eventually. The trouble is, I think, for most of us to understand this, we have to break it down into 2 categories. Going forward, NASA has 2 approaches: a low Earth orbit destination, which is the space station, and a long destination, if you will, that will require heavy rockets. That could be Mars, it could be an asteroid, it could be the moon. At the moment, the plan to go to low Earth orbit is to turn all of that over to commercial vendors. In other words, hiring a taxi service, and they are still arguing over who that could be, or competing over who that could be. It could be SpaceX, could be Boeing, you know, we'll see. There are a number of different players there who would say that they can get astronauts to the space station within 3, 4, 5 years. That's the first part of the problem. Now, the second part is the long game here. And to do that, we need a heavy lift capability. We're talking about rockets that are as big as the old Saturn V rockets during the Apollo days, and maybe even bigger. So that is kind of going back to that Constellation program that President Bush envisioned. They ditched originally under President Obama. Seconds ago, I talked to the Associate Administrator of NASA, who says that they will announce in the coming weeks who they are going to be using on a heavy lift rocket program. It could be, I think it likely will be, the original design or a version of that we've seen over the last few years, but they wanted to go back to the drawing board and make sure that these are the programs that make the most sense.
And joining me now, former astronaut Dr. Mae Jemison. By the way, if you didn't know, she's the first African-American woman to travel into space. Dr. Jemison, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see you today.
You're very welcome.
Let me get your thoughts on the end of the shuttle program.
Well, I think that the first thing that comes to mind is that you're saying goodbye to something that was very comfortable, that you knew, and that was a wonderful vehicle. And it's sad. Yeah. And at the same time, we really are looking forward to getting out of low Earth orbit. We're still in space. We still have humans going up. The United States is still the major partner in all of this. But now let's figure out how we can do something else. Let's do what I would have loved to have done. I was a little kid watching the Apollo program. I thought I'd have been going to the moon or Mars right now. So let's do that.
And we're hearing from the Obama administration, those are the goals. Either get to a close asteroid or to Mars. But again, it's many years away, and there's a lot of dissent. And quite honestly, some of the articles have described it as disarray happening with this space program.
Well, I don't think it's disarray. I think people are just nervous. I would love for us to make a commitment to do it in a shorter period of time. I mean, it took us 10 years to go to the moon when we didn't know anything about going to another planetary body. We didn't know anything about humans in space. So I think perhaps we could do it in a shorter period of time. But I think the issue is really our commitment as a society to space exploration, to what pushes us forward.
Do you believe we're no longer committed as we once were?
I think that we're committed to space exploration, but as long as we have a little project going on, it's okay, and we're doing more. But we are not committed. We back off of some of the big things sometimes because we don't want to lose it. And that's not just in space, in a lot of areas. But we have to have the energy to say, we're going to do this as a nation.
Absolutely. And even, you know, I think about how we tied into education, for example, with our math and science scores underperforming. And these are the things, these tools you need to turn you into a great historic astronaut as yourself. I mean, I've read every bio imaginable, and each of the astronauts talked about seeing that moment, you know, in a science class or on television, and having the wherewithal to want it and to pursue it. What do you think is needed out there to, I guess, produce young African-American girls like yourself who see this dream and turn it into a reality? What do we need to focus on?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. I want to take it out of the framework of being an astronaut. Yeah, it's great, but you know all the wonderful men and women who get us up there, right? The incredible people who design the shuttle, who put the shuttle together, the tile. My suit tech, who was a woman who had a high school degree, dressed SR-71 pilots. There are all kinds of jobs and roles in the sciences for people to be involved. What we have to do is to change some of the imagery. We as adults have to make a difference and commit to education. We have to also commit to funding programs that push us in research and not just always say, well, it's not good right now.
How many of them would, or you, like to certainly one day get an opportunity to go into orbit? It is that kind of sentiment which Sir Richard Branson, the founder of Virgin Galactic, is betting on. The billionaire investor hopes to take space tourists above the stratosphere for the price tag of about $200,000. George Whitesides is the CEO of Virgin Galactic, and he's here with us. George, it's a great pleasure to see you. I understand within the next 15 years, though, Branson thinks the ticket price will drop to $25,000. Still expensive, but far less than $200,000. That's amazing.
Well, we really think that Virgin Galactic can dramatically open spaceflight to humanity. And, you know, we know that we've got to get the price down, but we're going to start out here and go from there.
So where are you with the process right now? We know that there are about 80,000 people on this waiting list to go, but go when?
Very soon, I would say 18 months. We are, as you know, flying right now already with our vehicles, and so next year we're going to start going to space, and soon after that we're going to start taking people.
But the definition of space is part of the tricky point here. We're talking lower Earth.
Yeah. So the boundary into space is basically 100 kilometers
Right.
high, and so we're going up to about 110 kilometers. It's a short trip,
Right.
you know.